The silence in the house had become a familiar companion, a soft, persistent hum that underscored the predictable rhythm of my days. At 62, I had settled into a comfortable routine with Rob-ert, my husband of nearly 40 years. We had built a good life together, a life filled with shared memories and a quiet understanding. But somewhere along the way, the vibrant spark that had once ignited our relationship had dimmed, replaced by a gentle, unwavering ember. Love had morphed into a comfortable familiarity, passion into a predictable pattern. Rob-ert, once my adventurous partner, now seemed content with his crossword puzzles and early bedtimes. And me? Well, I often felt like a well-worn photograph. The colors faded, the edges softened, a pleasant reminder of a life lived, but perhaps not fully experienced. My son Ethan had always been a perceptive young man, even now at 35, a successful architect with a thoughtful gaze that sometimes made me feel like he could see right through me. He made it a point to come over for Sunday dinners, a tradition I cherished. But lately I'd noticed a subtle shift in his visits. He was still his usual charming self, full of stories about his work and his travels. But there was an added layer of attentiveness, a quiet concern that lingered in his eyes when he looked at me. It was as if he were subtly checking in, making sure I was, well, making sure of what exactly? One late afternoon, I was out in my garden, the late summer sun casting long shadows across the lawn. The scent of roses and freshly turned earth filled the air, a familiar comfort. I was deadheading some spent blooms when I heard the gate creak open. It was Ethan, a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched in his hand. "Hey, Mom," he said, his smile warm as he approached. "Thought these might brighten up the kitchen." "Oh, Ethan, they're lovely," I said, taking the colorful bunch. "What brings you by on a Tuesday?" He shrugged, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Just thought I'd see how you were doing." He paused. Then his gaze became a little more direct. "Mom, are you happy?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. It caught me off guard, like a sudden breeze on a still day. I chuckled softly, perhaps a little too quickly. "Of course, sweetheart. Why would you ask that?" Ethan stepped closer, his brow furrowed slightly. "I don't know. You just haven't seemed quite yourself lately." He leaned against the old oak tree in the yard, his arms crossed. "You used to hum while you gardened. I haven't heard that in a while." His words, though gentle, struck a chord within me. He was right. The quiet joy had somehow slipped away unnoticed. I looked down at my gardening gloves, the soil clinging to the worn fabric. Inside, a familiar ache of loneliness stirred. The house often felt too quiet, my days filled with routine but lacking a certain spark. I longed to feel truly seen, truly heard, but those feelings felt selfish, especially at this stage of my life. "Life just changes, Ethan," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "People change." He pushed off the tree, his expression earnest. "But that doesn't mean you should stop living, Mom. You used to be so full of energy. What happened?" I wanted to tell him everything. The quiet ache of feeling invisible in my own home, the longing for something more than routine, the sense that a part of me had gone dormant. But he was my son, and some burdens felt too heavy to place on his shoulders. So I offered a weak smile. "I'm fine, honey, really." He didn't look entirely convinced, but he didn't press further. In the weeks that followed, I noticed Ethan's efforts even more. He called more often, suggesting we try new restaurants or visit local museums. He'd share funny stories from his work, always trying to make me laugh. It was as if he had taken it upon himself to inject some joy back into my life. He had always been a good son, but this felt different, more intentional. One evening, He suggested we go for a walk in the park near my house. It was something we hadn't done together in years. The air was crisp, the late summer sky painted in hues of orange and purple. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of lightness, a momentary escape from the quiet confines of my home. "Tell me something," I said, as we strolled along a tree-lined path, the fallen leaves crunching softly under our feet. "What do you see for yourself in the future?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I don't know yet," he finally answered, "but I know I want to live without regrets." I smiled wistfully. "That's a good goal." "What about you, Mom?" he asked, turning to me. I stopped walking, the question catching me off guard. For so long, I had defined myself by my roles: wife, mother, homemaker. My own dreams and desires had been tucked away, buried under layers of responsibility. But standing there, under the twilight sky, I realized something. I didn't want to simply fade away. I didn't want to be just a shadow of the woman I once was. I wanted to feel alive again. "I think," I said slowly, the words feeling foreign yet liberating, "I want to start living for me again." Ethan's face broke into a genuine smile, and in that moment something shifted within me. I wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of excitement, a readiness to find out. As we continued our walk, a soft melody drifted through the air. A gentle jazz tune carried on the evening breeze. It seemed to be coming from a small cafe just ahead, its warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk. A few couples were swaying to the rhythm, lost in the music, their worries seemingly forgotten. I paused, enchanted by the scene. It had been so long since I had allowed myself to simply be in the moment, without thinking about the next task or the next day. Then, before I could even fully register the thought, Ethan took my hand. "Dance with me, Mom," he said, his eyes sparkling with a playful light. I laughed, shaking my head. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" But he was already gently pulling me towards the soft glow of the cafe's open patio. There were no questions, no time to refuse. One moment we were walking, and the next we were standing on the edge of the patio, the music wrapping around us like a warm embrace. Ethan's hand was warm and steady in mine, his other hand resting lightly on my waist. He led me with a surprising confidence. "Ethan," I chuckled, still feeling a bit bewildered, "you don't even dance." He grinned. "Neither do you, so we're even." Laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, real and unfiltered. The kind that had been missing from my life for far too long. The cafe music enveloped us, guiding our hesitant movements, and somehow we danced. Not gracefully, not expertly, but with a shared joy that filled the space between us. There was no awkwardness, no self-consciousness, just the simple rhythm of the song, the gentle twinkle of string lights above, and the unexpected feeling of being alive. The unexpected dance with Ethan at the cafe lingered in my mind like a sweet melody. The feel of his hand in mine, the slightly clumsy but heartfelt movements, the sheer joy of letting go. It was a sensation I hadn't realized I'd been missing so acutely. The next few days felt lighter, as if a small crack had appeared in the wall of routine that had enclosed my life, allowing a sliver of sunlight to peek through. Then a few days later, Ethan called with an intriguing proposition. "Mom," he said, his voice upbeat, "how about we take some dance lessons?" I was taken aback. "Dance lessons? Ethan, you know I haven't really danced since your father and I used to go to those community dances decades ago." He chuckled. "Exactly. It's time to dust off those moves. I was thinking, bachata? Bachata." The name sounded exotic, a little daring. "Bachata, isn't that rather Intimate? I asked, a slight blush warming my cheeks despite myself. That's the fun of it, Mom, he replied enthusiastically. It's all about connection and rhythm. Plus, it'll be something new for both of us. The idea was certainly appealing. It offered the prospect of spending more quality time with Ethan, something I genuinely cherished, and perhaps it was indeed time to step outside my comfort zone. Well, I said slowly, a smile playing on my lips, I suppose it couldn't hurt to try. As we prepared for our first lesson, my mind wandered back to my life before Rob-ert. I had been a single mother, raising Ethan on my own after his father left when he was just a toddler. Those years had been challenging, filled with long hours at work and the constant juggling of responsibilities. But they were also years of immense strength and a deep, unbreakable bond with my son. I had learned to rely on myself, to find joy in the simple moments, and there was a certain fierce independence I had cultivated. After Ethan went off to college, the house felt strangely empty. It was then that I briefly dated Richard. He was a kind man, a widower from my book club, and we shared a few pleasant dinners and outings. But there was no spark, no real connection that stirred my soul. It felt more like companionship out of convenience than genuine affection. The relationship eventually faded away, leaving me feeling more acutely aware of the quiet solitude of my life. Our first bachata class was held in a small, brightly lit studio above a local bakery. The air buzzed with nervous energy as other beginners, mostly couples, shuffled onto the wooden floor. Ethan, surprisingly, seemed quite at ease. He had a natural sense of rhythm and a relaxed confidence that I envied. My own movements felt stiff and awkward at first. The instructor, a young woman with a patient smile, guided us through the basic steps, emphasizing the importance of connection and fluidity. I stumbled a few times, my feet feeling like they had forgotten how to move in sync with the music. But Ethan was a patient partner, offering gentle corrections and words of encouragement. His hand on my back as he guided me through a turn felt surprisingly natural, a comforting presence. As the weeks went by and we continued our lessons, I started to feel more comfortable, more confident in my steps. The music with its sensual rhythm and underlying melancholy began to resonate with me. It spoke of longing and connection, emotions I had perhaps suppressed for too long. We even started practicing at home, pushing the living room furniture aside to create a makeshift dance floor. One evening, as we were attempting a particularly tricky footwork pattern, Ethan noticed me looking thoughtful. "What's on your mind, Mom?" he asked gently, pausing the music. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "It's just, I sometimes feel like my life has become so small, so predictable." Ethan sat down on the edge of the sofa, turning to face me. "I know, Mom. That's why I suggested the dancing. I wanted you to find something that makes you feel alive again." His words were so genuine, so full of care, that a wave of warmth washed over me. "It does, Ethan," I said, my voice a little thick with emotion. "It really does. I haven't felt this engaged in years." He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "Good. Because you deserve to feel happy, Mom. You've always put everyone else first." The dance lessons became our special ritual, a time for laughter, for shared learning, and for a connection that felt deeper than just mother and son. I started to look forward to the feeling of his hand in mine, the way we moved together, the unspoken understanding that seemed to grow with each step. It was as if, through the rhythm and the close proximity, we were rediscovering a language we had both forgotten we knew. As Ethan and I continued our bachata lessons, the nature of the dance itself began to subtly shift the dynamic between us. Bachata is a dance of closeness, of intricate footwork and flowing movements that often involve close physical contact. The gentle sway of our bodies, the brush of his hand against my waist as he led me through a turn, the brief moments where our chests would almost touch during a dip. These instances, though inherent to the dance, started to feel different. During one particular lesson, we were practicing a sensual body roll, a movement that required us to move in close synchronization. As Ethan guided me, his hand rested firmly on my lower back, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met. In that brief exchange, I saw something in his gaze that made my heart skip a beat, a look that went beyond the simple connection of dance partners. It was a look that held a warmth, an intensity that was both comforting and strangely unsettling. I quickly averted my eyes, a sudden heat rising in my cheeks. The memory of a conversation from years ago resurfaced in my mind. It was when I had been briefly dating Richard. Ethan, then in his late 20s, had been surprisingly vocal about his disapproval. "Mom," he had said one evening, his brow furrowed with concern, "I just don't see it with him. You don't seem happy, not the way you used to be." At the time, I had brushed it off as my son being overly protective, perhaps not wanting to see me with anyone after my long marriage to his father. But now, looking back, his words carried a different weight, a hint of something more profound. One evening, after a particularly energetic dance class, Ethan walked me to my car. The streetlights cast long shadows as we stood by the driver's side door. There was a comfortable silence between us, but tonight it felt charged with an unspoken energy. Ethan's gaze lingered on mine, and I felt a pull, an almost magnetic force drawing us closer. He reached out a hand, not quite touching me, then hesitated before gently brushing a stray strand of hair away from my forehead. The simple touch sent a shiver down my spine, a sensation that felt both familiar and forbidden. I found myself increasingly aware of Ethan's presence, the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth of his hand when he took mine to lead. It was a confusing mix of maternal comfort and a burgeoning awareness of him as a man. I tried to dismiss these feelings, to attribute them to the intimacy of the dance and the close bond we shared. But there were moments, fleeting yet potent, that made me question the nature of our connection. During another practice session at home, we were attempting a challenging dip. Ethan held me securely, my body leaning back in his strong arms. For a moment, we were suspended in that close embrace, our faces inches apart. I could feel his breath on my cheek, the steady beat of his heart against mine. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a moment that felt suspended in time. I pulled away slightly, a nervous laugh escaping my lips as I straightened up. "Almost had it," I said, perhaps a little too brightly. Ethan's concern for my happiness seemed to have an undercurrent that I couldn't quite decipher. There were times when his gaze felt almost possessive, a protectiveness that bordered on something else. He would watch me intently during our lessons, his eyes lingering a little too long, a quiet intensity in his expression that made me feel both flattered and strangely uneasy. One evening, as we were practicing a particularly fluid sequence of steps, our bodies moved in perfect sync. For a brief moment, I lost myself in the rhythm and the connection, a sense of pure joy washing over me. But then, as the music swelled, Ethan's hand on my waist tightened almost imperceptibly, and his gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a look that spoke volumes without uttering a single word, a look that hinted at a depth of feeling that went far beyond a simple dance partnership between a mother and son. I quickly broke eye contact, focusing intently on my footwork, a sudden wave of confusion and a strange, unfamiliar heat spreading through me. The line between student and teacher, between mother and son, felt increasingly blurred, and I wasn't entirely sure how to navigate the shifting terrain of our relationship. The bachata lessons continued to be a highlight of my week, a vibrant splash of color in what had become a largely monochromatic routine. I found myself looking forward to the music, to the challenge of learning new steps, and most of all, to the time spent with Ethan. He was a patient and encouraging teacher, and through the dance I felt a connection to him that had deepened in unexpected ways. One evening, after a particularly exhilarating session where we finally mastered a complicated turn, we were catching our breath in the studio. Ethan smiled at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth, "I haven't seen you this happy in years." His words resonated deeply. I realized how much I had allowed myself to recede into the background of my own life, content with the familiar comfort of routine, but unknowingly sacrificing a part of myself in the process. The dance lessons had stirred something within me, a sense of vitality and joy that I had thought was long dormant. I looked at Ethan, truly seeing him not just as my son, but as a grown man who had been a steadfast presence in my life, my confidant, and now my dance partner. Our bond had always been strong, forged through years of shared experiences and unwavering love. But lately there was a new layer to our connection, something unspoken that lingered in the air between us. There were those fleeting moments, the intensity in his gaze, the lingering touch, the charged silences, that hinted at a depth of feeling that felt both comforting and undeniably complex. I didn't have all the answers, and frankly, the nature of those feelings was something I hadn't fully allowed myself to explore. But what I did know was that I felt alive again, a sense of possibility stirring within me that I hadn't experienced in decades. "I am happy, Ethan," I said, my voice soft but firm, meeting his gaze. "You've helped me find a part of myself I thought I had lost." He reached out and gently squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "You never lost it, Mom. It was just waiting to be rediscovered." In that moment, standing in the quiet dance studio, surrounded by the echoes of the music and the unspoken emotions that hung between us, I realized that life, even at my age, could still hold surprises, could still offer new paths and unexpected connections. The future of my relationship with Ethan remained uncertain, a delicate dance of its own. But as I looked into his eyes, I felt a sense of hope, a quiet anticipation for whatever lay ahead. I knew one thing for sure. I deserved to feel this joy, this spark of life, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next, with Ethan right there beside me. The dance, it seemed, was just beginning,